In 2019, HBO's miniseries Chernobyl showed viewers the aftermath of the infamous nuclear power plant explosion, including both recovery efforts and Valery Legasov's investigation into how it happened. Over 5 episodes, we see Legasov and his team speak with survivors dying of radiation poisoning and sort through radioactive rubble, all while trying to prevent the spread of nuclear contamination through Greater Europe. But it's not until the very last episode when we see the fateful decisions that led to the disaster. As time ticks towards the inevitable explosion, Chief Engineer Anatoly Dyatlov yells at his employees, threatens their careers, and even uses physical violence to bully them into following his commands. So it's no surprise that during the trial, everyone, the prosecutors, the judges, Dyatlov, and even Legasov himself, fully expects Legasov to blame him for the entire catastrophe. But instead, Legasov blames the culture. He accuses the entire Soviet system of avoiding truth, of hiding failure, of always using the cheapest option, creating the latent conditions that led to the Chernobyl disaster. By refusing to cast Dyatlov as the scapegoat, his warning ensures that the safeguards are put into place to prevent another Chernobyl, even though it costs him his career and, ultimately, his life. From a storytelling standpoint, it's incredibly powerful. It subverts expectations that any one villain or shiftless plant operator is to blame, and encourages viewers to reflect on the systems that they live and work in, to ask,
what is the cost of lies?
From an organizational perspective, though, Legasov's diagnosis is also singularly unhelpful. If the Soviet system is at fault, which it is, to prevent Chernobyl, you would have had to go back in time and prevent the 1917 revolution, which actually means you would have needed to fix the 1905 revolution, which of course means you would have had to address the emancipation of the serfs, and so on. Realistically, the power plant operators couldn't retroactively change the Soviet system any more than we can alter the societies that we live in today. So how should we think about catastrophic failure within organizations and societies? Who's responsible when things go wrong? And more importantly, what can we do to prevent them from happening? Back in the 1980s, Professor of Psychology James Reason started studying organizational accidents, which he defined as the comparatively rare, but often catastrophic events that occur within complex modern technologies. As it turns out, the 80s were a great time for studying this kind of catastrophe. You had the 3 Mile Island incident kicking things off early in 1979, followed by the Bhopal gas leak in 1984, the Challenger explosion and Chernobyl in 1986, the King's Cross fire in 1987, and the Exxon Valdez oil spill in 1989. Each of these disasters was the result of both active failures and latent conditions. Active failures are intentional, unsafe acts committed by the people who are in direct contact with the system. When the operators at Chernobyl intentionally override safety systems to conduct a test of the new voltage generator, that's an active failure. Historically, we've blamed organizational accidents on these active failures, and more specifically, we've blamed the people who commit them. It's the fundamental attribution error. We believe people do things because of who they are, not the situation they're in. So Dyatlov is reckless, greedy, short-sighted, and the plant operators cowardly and stupid. And that's more or less what happened at the International Conference on Chernobyl. Legasov blamed the operators' dangerous behavior for the entire catastrophe. But as he later admitted, I told the truth in Vienna, but not the whole truth. The thing about active failures is that they're often a consequence of a poorly designed system. They're a sign of latent conditions that predispose the system to error or failure. They're typically a result of strategic decisions made at the leadership or the government level and impact the organizational culture at large. So the decision to build the RBMK reactor in the first place, with its weak containment structure, that was a latent condition. The Soviet culture, with its, as Legasov described it, incorrect running of the economy that encouraged cost-cutting at the cost of safety, that's a latent condition. These latent conditions may exist for years without causing any obvious failures, and as a result, they tend to build up, creating more and more potential for disaster. Of course, leaders aren't completely oblivious to the fact that things can go wrong. So to prevent disaster, high-risk systems develop a number of defensive layers. In Chernobyl, we actually see several. Some of these are engineered, like the AZ5 button, which is designed to completely cut off the reaction, or the computer alert, which tells the operators that they're operating at unsafe levels. Others are process-driven. there's an instruction manual to follow best practices, and one of the operators tries to force Dyatlov to register his order contrary to the best practices. And some simply rely on people doing the right thing. One person refuses to follow orders. But all of these layers have weaknesses. The person who refused backs down when his career is threatened. Dyatlov steamrolls the employees who try to get him to sign off. The computer alert is ignored because it's being used in a test, so of course the numbers can be dismissed. And the AZ5 button, which Dyatlov believes in the worst case scenario will serve as a failsafe and shut everything down, actually provides the spark that turns Chernobyl into a bomb. As Dutch psychologists Wagner and Gunnevig noted, accidents don't occur because people gamble and lose. They occur because people don't believe that the accident that is about to occur is at all possible. Think of each of these safety mechanisms as a slice of Swiss cheese. Every layer has holes, failure points, a potential opportunity for an accident to sneak through. This is Reason's Swiss cheese model. The more layers of protection, the less likely it is for all the holes to align, and the less likely an accident will occur. Instead, it'll seem like a near miss or a close call. For instance, if the test had taken place while the day shift, who had been trained for this procedure, was on duty, or if the test had been scheduled for the middle instead of the end of the month, perhaps the holes would have never aligned up for Chernobyl, and we'd never be watching a series about it. You see, in real life, unlike in cheese, holes aren't static. Weaknesses and failures change on any given day, so you can't just establish safety protocols and trust that they'll always work. But it does suggest a more effective approach to preventing organizational accidents. Showrunner Craig Mazin wrote Chernobyl to remind viewers that catastrophes don't happen because of bad luck. It doesn't happen because you were doomed or because of fate. It happens because of science, facts. And if it happens because of science, that means if we pay attention to science, we can avoid it happening. Now, chances are you're not working in a high-risk environment like a nuclear power plant or an oil rig. But every organization, every system has weaknesses, where if something goes wrong, people's lives will be severely negatively impacted. The bad news is that no matter how diligent you are, mistakes will happen. As long as you're working with humans, you will be subject to human error. People will fail, systems will be imperfect. But what we can do is stay vigilant and make the people who control the system aware of these errors so they can be corrected. As Reason says, we cannot change the human condition, but we can change the conditions under which humans work. The first step is to determine your own zone of control. What are the conditions you can change? Again, Legasov's criticism that the entire Soviet system is ultimately to blame for the explosion at Chernobyl may be true, but it's also unhelpful if the operators can't do anything about it. It's outside their zone of control. Instead, we want to look at what's in your zone of control, what you can directly impact, and your zone of influence, where you can impact other people. One of the places you do tend to have control is in your immediate culture, the team you work with on a day-to-day basis. Your goal should be to create a psychologically safe culture. That is, one in which people feel that sharing bad news or reporting a problem won't get them punished. In fact, Reason specifically noted that the complete absence of such a reporting culture within the Soviet Union contributed crucially to the Chernobyl disaster. If people are willing to report issues, teams can take advantage of near misses to identify what's going wrong and fix it before it becomes a major problem, before an accident passes through all the layers of cheese. In a way, this is actually what we see Kamyuk do over the course of the series. She interviews plant operators to build out a timeline to discover what went wrong. Obviously, it's too late to apply these lessons to Chernobyl, but other nuclear plants, the ones that are still operating with the RBMK reactors, with operators who still believe that the AZ5 button will prevent a meltdown, can prevent this situation from happening again. In a potentially dangerous situation like a nuclear power plant, though, you probably won't have that many near misses. With only so many chances to learn from mistakes, teams should also engage in proactive testing to identify holes and missing layers. While this can be a literal physical test of a system to see what fails, thought exercises could be just as useful. Team members can share stories about what they've seen so that others can gain from their knowledge, or role-play potential responses. One of our favorite tools is a pre-mortem. Imagine a year from now and a major project has failed. What happened? Why did things fail? And most importantly, what can you do now to either prevent those things from happening, or what will you do if you see things start to go wrong? But perhaps the most important thing teams must do is never become complacent. In fact, that's often the greatest weakness in any system. when people cease to be afraid of the powers they think they control. If Dyatlov didn't have an AZ-5 button, if he didn't believe he had a backup plan in case everything went wrong, would he have acted so recklessly? When dealing with high-risk systems, you must always look for holes, keeping in mind that what worked yesterday might not be what's required today. As Reason noted, the only attainable goal for safety management is not zero accidents, but to reach that region of the safety space associated with maximum resistance, and then stay in there. Chernobyl ends with another kind of failure. Legasov's courageous attempt to tell the truth about the accident during the trial, in front of other members of the scientific community, will be stricken from the record, his authority and influence completely removed by the KGB. He's risked everything and accomplished nothing. 2 years after the accident, he records his memoirs on audio tapes and commits suicide. Yet ultimately, the flaws in the RBMK reactor were fixed, preventing, at least up till now, another Chernobyl from happening. What changed? Well, just as no one person can truly be blamed for Chernobyl, no one person can truly claim all the credit for fixing its underlying flaws, not even Legasov. In his investigation, he was aided by dozens of scientists, represented by the Commute character, who also spoke out, risking their own arrest. And while Legasov's suicide made his audio tapes impossible to ignore, it was the Soviet scientific community that then pushed through the needed reforms to the other RBMK plants. Chernobyl shows that flawed individuals can work together to change their working conditions, even when they can't change the larger systems they're working in. If you don't, if we as organizations and societies become complacent, if we become convinced that we're in control of the worst-case scenario, it may be helpful to remember a final warning from Professor Reason. Every society gets the disaster it deserves. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to see more videos on organizational culture and change, make sure you subscribe to our channel or visit us at nobel.io.